Are you currently submitting your FPAS application for your foundation year jobs? Well, today we're going to be discussing 5 things you should consider before submitting them. So Abdul, let's take it away with the first question being, when you were doing the FPAS jobs and it came to the part of the jobs that you're now going to select, what was the first thing that was coming through your mind when choosing?
So, as part of the process, you need to basically rank a good few hundred jobs, right? In like chronological order, the most priority to the least priority. So the one thing I knew that I wanted to do was I basically copied them all over into an Excel spreadsheet and basically made a list or highlighted the ones I did not want to do. So I think the easiest way to go about it for me was basically there were certain specialties that I didn't want to do. So one of them was like psych. I didn't really want to do it. So I got rid of all of those jobs and just got rid of that track, right? Before we even start, we should probably spend time talking about the ranking and the FPAS applications. Essentially, once you get allocated your deanery of choice or where you've been put into, you then get all the different rotations you do for F1 and F2, and you need to rank it in order of preference. And depending on your score, you get the one that's highest on your list, right? So the person that does the best in the EPM SJT will get the first rank choice and so on and so forth. It's 6 rotations, 3 in F1, 3 in F2, 4 months each. And you basically can pick which hospitals, what rotation, in what order. When you go into it, you just think it's random jobs, but actually you have to be very strategic in the order, the type of jobs. So the first thing I did was basically I had to pick from 223 different tracks, right? I got rid of all the ones that had psych in there. And that's gone, and that kind of reduced it.
And was that purely because you didn't like psych?
Yeah, it's a specialty I knew I didn't want to pursue. I didn't really have a passion for it. And when you're dealing and ranking so many jobs, you just need to make your life easier. You don't have the time, so you can easily know, okay, I'm never going to do this, I'm not going to enjoy it, let me move it away.
So I guess that's one thing to first, I guess, decide on is basically, do you have zero interest and there is never going to be any chance of you doing it in the future? So for example, for me, it was something like ophthalmology. I was not interested in it. I didn't see any of the exams. I did nothing. I did no research into it. I didn't want to do ophthalmology. So zero chance. So I guess you're right. The first step would probably be decide what you just don't like, don't want to do, you have no interest in going into in the future. And if you want to avoid it, you can avoid it. The choice is there. What would you say is the next thing that started to go through your mind after you eliminated psych from the list?
So once I got rid of the ones I didn't want to do, I then made a list of the ones I really wanted to do. And I knew they were going to be my top preference. So for me, it was stuff like TNO, urology. And I'll tell you a funny story about the urology rotation. So once I knew, okay, these are the particular specialties like general surgery you have to do anyway. TNO, I really want to do that. So then I basically ranked those ones. And so hindsight is a good thing, right? So I'll tell you what I should have done and what I ended up doing. So I essentially ranked it in the order of, these are the rotations I want to do. And I didn't necessarily think about the order of those rotations, right? And I just ranked it. And the funny story is, I really wanted to look into urology. I was interested in that specialty as well, right? TNO and urology were 2 of the most popular ones I wanted to go into. And obviously, I did it in such a rush. Urology, I got mistaken for genitourinary medicine, right? So, which was HIV, sexual health, which ended up being an incredible rotation. Gum medicine is very good. Outpatient clinic, on-calls are super nice and chilled. So that worked in my favor. And then we can talk about the block and the order rotation. But yeah, the learn from our mistakes is take your time and do it. Don't rush into it. It's not something you want to do the day before submission. You want to be organized about it and make sure you're picking the right rotations correctly and you understand what that specialty is, because some of the terminology they use is very different to what we learned in medical school.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first tip when doing this whole FPAS, when doing the job preferences, the first thing to do is decide what specialty are you interested in, what specialty you might go into, what specialty do you want to discover. So for example, ENT exposure is very limited at med school. You might want to become exposed to ENT, see what the life is like, see what the consultant life is like, and you can pick it as a job, as an F2, F1 job, and you can do it to see if you like it. And of course, you should be picking the stuff that you see a future in. You might want to be a cardiologist, so see if you can get a cardiology job, or in endocrinology, or whatever it is, or surgery. So yep, number one tip is, what specialty are you interested in? Try and go for those. What specialties might you be interested in? Go for that as well. Obs and gynae, stuff that, again, that you don't get exposed to. So that's tip number one. And then you talked about timing though. Why is timing important as an F1, F2 when you do what?
So I discovered how important it was while doing F1 and F2. So it's 3 rotations in F1, 4 months block each. You start towards the middle end of summer, you did a winter, and then you follow on to the summer, right? So what I realized after doing F1 or towards the end of F1 summertime is loads of medics, the smart ones, the strategic ones, they basically were planning to sit exams for the September period, right? And they wanted to revise for those exams because those exams are really important for specialty training, right? So they picked rotations which are very light with regard on calls. It's 9 to 5, so GP, psych, outpatient clinics, stuff like hematology, gum, right? And I picked it not knowing how important the order was because, okay, I'm interested in this, I want to do this. They picked it knowing, okay, winters are very busy in medicine, I'm going to avoid medicine. Summers are important for me to enjoy the summer, to go with my friends and family, holidays, exams. I'm going to pick specialties where there's no on-calls, there's no nights, there's no weekends. And they probably picked a difficult rotation towards the beginning of each F1 and F2. I don't know if you noticed that and what your thoughts are on that.
No, I completely agree. So this is now point 2 of when you're selecting jobs for the foundation year, you should be thinking about, are you going to be sitting any exams, right? Because exams might be in the winter period, might be in the September period, might be in the summer period. You need to know how intense the job is going to be. So, for example, if you're on an A&E rota, which is notorious for being quite long, you're doing long hours, it's usually 10 to 12 hour shifts, you'll find it very difficult to revise, for example, for the MRCS, MSRA, or the DONS exam, or whatever it is, right? So, you're right, most people were strategic. They picked specialties that were lighter on the on-call front mainly. So, like you said, GP and the psychiatry rotations as an F1 were perfect because you'd be doing 9 to 5, you're not on call, you're not doing weekends at all. So you've got time to revise, time to invest. Obviously, that doesn't mean you can't pass the exam. It just means that you've got more time to revise, simple as.
It's a situation of unfair advantage. Exactly. If you and another medic are sitting the same exam and you're busy with on-call nights and weekends compared to someone who's on a GP rotation that doesn't have nights, on-calls and weekends, let's be honest, they're going to be able to put in a lot more time, effort in revising and preparing for the exam, right? When I saw it, I was like, oh, very clever.
Exactly. So there's that timing aspect of it. There's also the timing element of when you want to rest. So I did this. So what I did was, I did it in the order of Gen Surg, Psychiatry, Acute Internal Medicine, and for F2 it was Emergency Medicine, GP, and then back to Cardiology, which ended up being COVID. But the reason why I did it in that particular order was because I wanted a break simply in between 2 intense jobs. So I was purposely picking general surgery and acute internal medicine, picked it at a tertiary center. I knew they were going to be super busy. I wanted to sandwich it with something that gave me a bit of a break. And likewise for the F2 year as well. So timing is important for also just general well-being. If you're interested in just taking Christmas a bit easier or having a break in between the intense rotations. But timing is also important because to be able to plan life in a sense. So talking about, say you get married, say you want to go traveling for a certain period of time when you have loads of annual leaves that you've accrued. What would you say about that?
Yeah, it makes sense. I agree with the way you did it. That's smart as well. A lot of people do the same, where you don't want to have 2 busy rotations back to back and you're burnt out. So that's another thing. You need to make sure you don't get burnt out by F1 and F2. You're right. Some rotations, it's always the supernumerary ones or GP psych where getting time off is easier, annual leave is easier, you can plan around it easier. Because when you're in a busy gen med rotation, even if you do want time off or annual leave, a lot of those on-calls you're swapping with people and it's a lot of hassle, right? Which you don't really want to do, especially if you're planning a big event like a wedding or like a big family holiday type of thing. So yeah, very strategic with regards to that.
Absolutely. So yeah, so that was tip number 3. I think we're on 3. Realize how heavy the rota is. And if you've got any major life events coming up, you want to be able to pick something that also gives you that freedom of getting days off. The next thing we wanted to talk about was, so when you're picking these preferences, you'll also get a preference of hospitals to be at. They can be at the DGHs, they can be at the sister hospitals, they can be at the major tertiary units as well, the trauma centers. What's your thoughts on picking between them, or staying in one, or not moving? Should you move, should you not?
So different people go about it different ways. So some people want to be in a big tertiary teaching hospital center because there's a lot more learning, there's a lot more opportunities. It's very busy, it's very fast paced, in the deep end, right? And some people like that, they thrive off that. Some people, they want to have a bit more of a relaxed journey. Let's say they do a DGH. What I did, so my first rotation was general surgery. Obviously at that time we were kind of keen on surgery. I knew I would have more opportunities to get stuck in and go theatres in a DGH compared to a large tertiary centre where there's loads of registrars, where there's loads of core surgical trainees waiting in line to go to theatres, right? So I played it in a sense, okay, I'm going to do gen surg, I'm interested in surgery, I'm going to get as much hands-on as possible, let me do in a DGH. And we know, even for medical, they're like, DGH, you get a lot more theatre time because struggling. There's been so many times, we've mentioned so many times, where the consultant or the reg needs your help because there's not enough staff. Whereas I know if I did the same rotation in a big centre, I would not have been able to get even a fraction of the surgical time I did.
Yeah, I think talking about surgery, getting theatre time, and the concept of DGHs versus tertiary units, I think this also does tie in with the timing element of whether you should be doing it in F1 or F2. For example, the F1, you're more ward-based, right? Yeah. And if you do it as your first job, let's be honest, you're going to be in a tertiary unit where I was tied down to the wards. Lots of patients, very, very sick, post-op, need a lot of care, basically. But then again, if I was to do gen surg at a tertiary unit as an F2, I'm now holding the bleep. There's an F1 looking after the ward. I'm now supporting the registrar. I'll probably be in theatres more. Exactly. So I think this is where you do need to think about what hospital am I going to, what's the job, and at what level. Because remember, now you're doing F1 and F2. They're very different types of jobs, right? One of them, you've got a lot more responsibility. You're probably taking referrals. You're probably going to be doing more procedures compared to an F1, let's say, who's doing more ward-based care and might get to observe a procedure here or there.
I think that is a good time to reach out to people that have done the rotations.
Yeah.
So once I've come back from Coventry, a lot of medics that were going to Coventry to these hospitals reached out to me specifically and said, okay, how was this hospital? How was this rotation? What was it like? What were the consultants? What were the team like? What were the rota like? So I think I never did that, right? But if you make an informed decision, because I told these people that reached out to me, yo, it's like this. If you want to do this, this is the best place to do it. If you want to do that, this is the best place to do it. And even if I didn't have direct experience with a rotation, obviously I had flatmates that were medics as well, and I knew other medics. I was like, okay, cool. They said this rotation in this hospital is really good for ONG. Yeah. And you can make that recommendation because they were your colleagues, right? Yeah. So speak to people that are there and that have done the rotation, especially if they're just finishing. That's like golden information you're not going to get.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree with that. All right, then. So the next thing is specialty planning, specialty discovering, and taster weeks. That's the next thing that you should be thinking about, right? So remember, you do F2 and the applications are actually that winter in your F2 year. So at the end of your first rotation, you're doing most of your applications, be it for surgery, medicine, GP training, whatever it is, right? Some of these specialties, they value taster weeks a lot. So for example, radiology values you having some experience in a radiology unit. What would you say is important on this front?
So it's important to know when the application season opens. Stuff like GP and certain specialties, it's not that important because you don't really have the interview, you don't really have the portfolio. Other specialties, there's a big emphasis on portfolio. So if you know you are pursuing a certain specialty, you want to go down that route, and the opportunities like publications, audits and research are within that specialty, try get those specialty on situations or specialties early on, before your application season starts, right? Let's say you want to do hematology and you want to put an application. You want to do the hematology rotation block before application season.
Yeah.
So you can talk about it in your interview. You can talk about it in your portfolio, right? And get those points as to doing it at the end of F2 when application season is kind of well and gone.
Exactly. And you also get the opportunities of research, audits in that specialty if you are interested. But I think moving on to the taster week front now, right? You have to make sure you've got the rotations that will give you some freedom, right? To go and do it. So for example, if I'm on a busy tertiary surgical unit, right? How happy would they be to let their F1 or F2 go away for a whole week to another specialty? Whereas, I don't know, you might be supernumerary in A&E as an F1, or you might be in a GP surgery that's well staffed and they don't need you as much, and they might say, you know what, you're okay to go off for a week. And that's points on your radiology application. So that's taster weeks, that's specialty discovery, making sure you've got some sort of background in there, helps you get those points that you need. And then we've already talked about exams, right? Making sure you've got the right block to give you enough time to revise and sit the exams. What about courses? What about doing extracurricular courses for specialty?
So it all comes down to... So the general rule, I think, is they should always allow you to have study days, study budget, study leave, be able to allow you to take the weeks. But the reality of it is, if it's a busy unit, there's loads of things happening. It's like a big workforce where loads of people are unwell and they're all trying to fit you in and there's already rota gaps. Getting those study leave and study days to go to course and conferences is very, very difficult. Even though they're supposed to be fair and they let you do it. But when it comes down to it, reality, it's very difficult. So if you know there's a particular season where there are loads of conferences in the specialty of interest, then maybe be strategic in the rotations you do it. I think the crux of this whole conversation is essentially there are a handful of specialties that are fillers that allow you to do things outside of medicine that give you the space and freedom to do the courses, the conference, the taster weeks, annual leave, family planning, etc., right? Which are the supernumerary ones, the rotations where you don't have to do on-calls, nights or weekends, and essentially playing with those to make the most of F1, F2 in a very strategic way.
Exactly. And finally, let's move on to the last thing that I want to talk about is, as an F1, if you've got loads of projects going as a medical student, as an F1, it becomes very difficult. We know it becomes very difficult. So if you see a future in digital health, in health tech, med tech, your own startup, right? And you want to get through foundation training, you want to get fully registered, you want to have the door to locum as an F3 and so forth open to you. What's your thought process behind that, about thinking about, okay, fine, I do want to have a side project actually whilst I'm doing foundation training?
So the advice I always give, I've been banging on about it, is if you are thinking of doing a side project or a startup, whatever it is, definitely start it before you start foundation training. I think a lot of medics that have become F1s will realize what I'm talking about is you can never really anticipate or understand or appreciate the hit you get from going as a medical student to working full-time with responsibilities and being expected to turn up every single day at 9 o'clock on the dot or whatever time it may be, right? Compared to a medical student where you are relatively free and you can do whatever the hell you want. And for the first month or two, you're just adjusting to working life as a doctor, right? So naturally, everything outside of medicine, outside the core living, eating, drinking, sleeping is put to the back burner, right? And you can easily fall behind. So the advice I give is whatever projects you want to do, start it while you're a medical student. So when you are F1, there's a level of commitment, accountability, and you're responsible for continuing. It might be a project, coding, or content creation. The second thing is you need to make time for it, in the sense what you said is either an hour a day or every hour, every other day, make time for it, man. And the best thing is, and I used to do it as well, is sometimes when I'm feeling a bit better, when I'm ready, I'll get to it. I never planned it into my plan or my schedule, right? Whereas I think it's important you have to bring it in rather than have the mindset and mentality of I'm tired, I'm going to let myself off, whatever. And when I'm ready, I'll get to it. Because you will never get to it. You will always be tired.
Absolutely. That's so true. So yeah, so with foundation application, choosing the jobs and everything, do have a think about your side passion, your side projects and all that, and keep it alive. As Abdul said, you have to keep going. You have to make sure you're accountable and you keep working on it every single day. I think if you're going to be strategic about it, the way I went about it was probably, in hindsight, a little bit clever, in the sense that have sort of specialties that give you a little bit of time. So I chose GP and psychiatry. Depends on what units you're at, depends on what responsibilities you have. So for example, I do know now the psych trainees at my place, they're also on take every so often. So they've taken away some of that time, and I had every weekend off. Some of them have to do weekend on call covering surgery. Don't know how that makes sense, but they do it. So it's unfortunate, but if you find a little bit about from trainees that are at certain places, ask them, what do you cover when you're not doing weekends as a psych trainee or whatever it is. That's useful. But I think on the projects front of it, I don't think anyone has time, and no job in the world gives you that ample amounts of time. You just have to make the time. But I think looking back, I am very happy that I kept projects alive through F1 and F2, because you want it the same way as university, right? At the end of university, you want to come away with more than the medical degree. You want to come away with all these various experiences and projects and stuff like that. Similarly, I look at foundation training as a graduation period. You graduate as a foundation qualified doctor or whatever it is, but you've also got I sat my MRCS actually, and I also managed to secure a CST post, or I've got a new medtech startup and I've got funding, and I'm on the NHS clinical entrepreneurship program. So I think foundation training is an opportunity to do loads of things as well, if you can get to grips to it very quickly as well. That's it from my end.
Yeah, I agree. I think F1, F2 is a very difficult time period. It's hard. It's the first time you're a doctor. It's going to be the first time you're doing nights, weekends, on calls. It's hard. It takes a toll on you naturally. But there are ways to play it to your advantage if you are smart and strategic with it. So yeah, there's a lot of videos we've shared about this stuff, which is important. But yeah, I think the key thing, the biggest regret you'll have is getting through F1 and F2 and struggling to kind of keep those passions and projects alive. And I think a lot of people, when they look back on their journey during F1 and F2, they're like, do you know what? I could have kept it alive. I could have done it like this, but I just didn't. I was just kind of consumed by it and too caught up in it. Whereas the ones that did manage to keep it alive, they're like, do you know what? I'm really glad I did it. And I did it like this, right? Exactly. So, yeah, if you do have a side project or passion, keep it alive with whatever means necessary, man. I assure you it's worth it.
Yeah, exactly. It's the saying, isn't it? The job will take as much as you can give to it.
Yeah. Essentially, that's
It will take every single thing. And when we say side projects, side passions, all of that, always remember, it's not necessarily a business. It might be anything, right? It might be playing sports, catching up with friends and family, and looking after your mental well-being, right? So when we say all of these side things, we're also referring to that. You might, for example, strategically pick F1 jobs so that you're fully competent, you're fully well, you're going to go into medicine, you know you are, but you've also got time to just chill out. Exactly. You just want to be family over Christmas, or you want to have an extended period break and certain rotations and whatever. It's all about prioritizing what you want and making sure it doesn't consume you. So F1 is a fun time. I think F1 and F2, looking back, it was difficult. Yes, it was difficult, but looking back, you grow so much as a person. And if you can take it into a stride, it's literally a propeller, essentially. So that's it from me. What about you? Any lasting remarks? Thanks for tuning in this week, and we'll see you next week.